I know what you're thinking. Is the PS5 worth $500? Is it that much different from the PS4 that I need to upgrade? The resounding answer is yes. Not only are more exclusives coming out for PlayStation 5, but cross-gen titles are starting to show the limitations of last-gen hardware. There are a few exceptions, but the ability to play in 60 FPS on Sony's newer machine cannot be overlooked. Faster load times from the new SSD and higher resolution games are just some of the upgrades you can expect. Here are 10 PS5 games to justify your next-gen PlayStation purchase. Number 10. Evil West, a third-person shooter involving vampires in the Wild West. As soon as I heard the word vampires, I was sold. Think of it as a cross between Devil May Cry and God of War. It's an unlikely pairing, but works well when you see the game in action. Shooting with your arsenal of firearms feel good enough, but it's when you incorporate melee weapons into the mix that really makes the gameplay shine. New abilities are unlocked rather quickly in the game, so you'll have plenty of moves to try out early on. You can zap enemies with electricity, unleash a flurry of punches, or jump up and slam into the ground, creating a shockwave. And then there's my favorite, launching an enemy into the air with an uppercut and finishing off with a 6-shot pistol. One-shot kills and environmental hazards can also be used. My only concern is the slight repetitiveness to the gameplay, but because the moves look so cool, I didn't mind. Visually, I don't think it's the best looking game I've played so far this generation, but I do have to give credit to the art design. There's a certain stylistic flair to the visuals that makes it stand out from other action games. And although I'm not a big fan of motion blur, Evil West makes great use of it without being too distracting. Special effects look amazing, and thanks to the PS5 hardware, everything runs at a smooth 60 FPS with very little loading. Also, adaptive trigger support on the DualSense provide nice feedback when using some of the weapons. I think the one thing that sets Evil West apart from recent action games is just the sheer confidence in what it wants to be. A linear action game with cool weapons and over-the-top violence, relying less on exploration and more on its frantic style combat. It doesn't try to bombard you with a ton of objectives, nor does it require you to collect a million things. Heck, you don't even have to collect ammo. Each weapon has a cooldown meter that reloads after a certain period of time. The story isn't going to win any game awards, but it's entertaining and easy to follow. And although the writing is cheesy, it works for some reason. Give it a try. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Number 9. Horizon Forbidden West. You know, at first I felt like this game had way too many mechanics. Not only did you have a ranged weapon, but a melee one as well. And not only did you have to contend with regular human enemies, but you also had to deal with giant robotic dinosaurs. On top of that, enemies also had specific weak points you had to target. Did I also mention your attacks have elemental properties attached to them? In addition, the screen is jam-packed with information. It's just too busy looking. To say that I was a bit overwhelmed would be an understatement. I'm used to games with a more streamlined approach, and Horizon Forbidden West was anything but. There's just way too much going on in this game. But funny enough, the more I played it, the more I started to like it, and I think I know why. Horizon Forbidden West isn't the type of game where you immediately go in and start blowing crap up. It's an action and role-playing game that leans heavily towards exploration. You need to take your time and just take in the sights. And what a sight it is, because this game is absolutely gorgeous. It's probably one of the best uses of HDR to date. Whether you're on land or water, there isn't one single part in this game that doesn't impress. Boss encounters highlight the beautiful artwork and animation, as do the brilliant sound design. I have to say brilliant because there's absolutely no other word I can think of to describe how amazing everything sounds. Like, whoever did the sound mixing should get an Emmy. Truly a technical showpiece for Sony's new next-gen machine. What's even better, PlayStation 5 gives you an option to play in 60 FPS. Now, for those who played the first game, Forbidden West picks up where Zero Dawn left off. Once again, you play as the beautiful redhead Aloy, as she embarks on a journey to the mysterious frontier known as the Forbidden West. Oh hey, just like the title. What really impressed me the most was just the sheer size and scope of the game. There's just so much variety in the gameplay that no two enemy encounter ever felt the same. Do you sneak around and go for a stealth kill, or unload an arsenal of poisonous arrows? Or do you just avoid the whole situation completely? Other gadgets like placing tripwire and exploding balloons further expand your creativity. And yet for as much freedom as you're given, I think it's the one thing that might frustrate some people. If you're familiar with the first game, then Forbidden West should feel like home. But for newcomers, the first few hours can be overwhelming. It's a lot to take in, but if you've got the patience, you're rewarded with an unforgettable journey. Number 8. God of War Ragnarok. Brilliant storytelling, unforgettable characters, epic boss battles, and beautiful graphics make this purchase a no-brainer. To anyone calling this game a walking simulator, I say to you, shut up. A direct sequel to God of War 2018, the story picks up exactly where the previous title left off. A few years have gone by, Atreus is now a teenager, you're still Kratos, and you're trying to prevent Ragnarok from happening. It's pretty much the epic conclusion to the series' take on Norse mythology, and believe me when I say this, it is indeed epic. Although a lot of the gameplay mechanics have carried over, Ragnarok features a more polished presentation. The combat, although familiar, is just as fun and addictive as it's ever been. There's a wide arsenal of moves to discover, with tons of challenging enemies to use them on. This game is more than just a button masher. You're really gonna have to learn how to time those parries, and use them you will if you want to survive. Additional moves have been added to existing weapons, as well as the introduction of a few new ones. I think they fit perfectly in with the God of War universe. Some even harken back to previous games. Like, wasn't there one game on the PSP where he would use a spear? Does anyone here remember? Environmental puzzles are still there and can be a little confusing. They usually involve a combination of arrows and axe throws. They're rewarding when you figure them out, but boy did I have a few WTF moments. And hats off to the impeccable writing. A story so well told with character performances so believable, the line between game and movie are becoming less noticeable. Visually, Ragnarok builds upon God of War 2018, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. The first game looked stunning and pushed the PS4 to its limits. Playing the sequel on PS5 gives you a taste of what next gen has to offer. Performance mode runs the game at a locked 60 FPS with improved lighting and reflections. Detail also appears sharper and more refined, thanks in part to the PS5's higher tessellation quality. It's not the end of the world if you play it on PS4, but man is the experience a whole lot smoother on Sony's current gen console. Finishing moves are still gruesome as ever, reminding you this is still a God of War game. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to show off any of them in fear of getting demonetized, so you're just gonna have to use your imagination. Ah, screw it. Here you go. Just send me a super thanks and we'll call it even. Number 7. No More Heroes 3. An open-world, third-person action-adventure game, but unlike other open-world games, there's very little exploring to be done. Instead, the open world is used more as a means of transportation to get you from one mission to the next. Each completed mission grants you money, and with enough money, you're able to pay an entry fee to a ranked battle, basically a boss fight. There's a total of 10 bosses, and that's pretty much it. Complete the required amount of designated matches, transfer your money to an ATM, and fight a boss. Rinse and repeat. In between, you can participate in volunteer missions. They're basically side quests, usually involves running an errand, collecting something, bike races, you know, those kind of things. Now, you might think, well, what's so great about this game then? The magic relies in its combat and storytelling. Making numerous parodies of pop culture media, No More Heroes is actually pretty hilarious. But it's also the small things, like helping to maintain the city's sanitation facilities by fixing clogged toilets. It's the equivalent to synchronizing viewpoints in Assassin's Creed games, but here it's done in such a comical way, you can't help but laugh and admire its sense of humor. Other hilarious mechanics involve you shaking your katana whenever it needs a charge, as well as using a toilet to save your game. Fourth wall breaking dialogue makes the story not only funny, but original, something that's pretty rare in the video game industry today. On top of that, the addictive and well-executed combat ensures this katana never gets dull. It's a beautiful ballet of parries, counters, and quick-time events. Yelling out obscenities as you perform a killer slash never gets old and perfectly portrays the style and attitude this game is going for. Get the fuck out! Graphically, it might not be the prettiest game out there, but its super stylistic art design more than makes up for it. If you played this on Nintendo Switch, then expect to see an improved draw distance as well as updated textures. And thanks to the PS5's next-gen horsepower, the game runs at a blistering 60 FPS in and out of combat. Yes, that includes the open world area as well. The unique thing about No More Heroes 3 is that it reminds me of gaming back when you played the game rather than watch cutscenes. I mean, it's not that cutscenes are bad, it's just I feel like most AAA games today are pushing so hard to bridge the gap between movie and game that sometimes you're left watching more than you're playing. It's like every developer nowadays feel like they need Oscar-winning scripts to be a good game. Number 6. Gran Turismo 7. Now, I know there's been a lot of controversy surrounding microtransactions and the amount of grinding you have to do. Personally, it's been so long since I've played a Gran Turismo game that I didn't even notice. I mean, I don't really care about that kind of thing, nor do I waste energy making videos about it on YouTube. I'm too busy playing the game and having a good time. If no one had told me, I probably wouldn't even have noticed. However, the one thing that does bother me is having to always be online. Yes, this includes the single player modes. Like, what? Why? So in that regard, I can understand the frustration. Without an internet connection, the game is pretty much useless. But then again, when it works, boy does it work. Returning features include a single player campaign, special events, championships, driving school, used cars dealerships, and the ability to upgrade your vehicle at a tuning shop. In addition, you also get features introduced in GT Sport, such as Brand Central and Discover. Of course, my favorite new feature has to be the menu books from the GT Cafe. They're basically single-player campaign missions that offer a deeper insight into the world of car culture. With that being said, my knowledge of car culture is extremely limited, so a lot of the information was quite fascinating. Of course, you all want to know why Gran Turismo 7 plays the best on PS5, right? Aside from the real-time ray tracing effects and the 3D spatial audio, the most noticeable difference for me had to be the loading times and the DualSense controller. Thanks to the SSD, starting and restarting a race was super quick. There was also a greater sense of immersion when using Sony's new next-gen controller as well. The adaptive triggers definitely gave me a tactile feeling as I applied the gas. Same goes for the brakes. And haptic feedback also let you know how smooth or rough the terrain is. These features on their own don't mean much, but when taken all together, is definitely worth the next-gen upgrade. Aside from that, the game plays beautifully. As a racing fan, I absolutely had a blast with GT7. However, I feel the people who have more extensive knowledge of cars are the ones who will get the most out of this game. Cars can be tweaked and customized like there's no tomorrow, detailing specific features which I never even knew existed on a car. Online races are fun, and connection was smooth for the most part. Although, don't be shocked when you get left in the dust by some of the other people. I guess my car just wasn't fast enough. Now, before I present the next game, I'm just gonna ask that you hit that like button if this video has been helpful in any way so far. That would be awesome. Thank you. Number 5. Cana, Bridge of Spirits. Man, this game is like the true definition of a hidden gem. It's a third-person action-adventure game, reminiscent of classic action games of the past. You take on the role of Cana, a young spirit guide with magic abilities who tries to help deceased people move from the physical to the spirit world. The combat is pretty basic, to be honest. You've got your light, heavy, and charge attacks. There's a dodge which you will use to avoid incoming attacks, and your staff can also be used to shoot arrows. There's also simple platforming and traversing through the environment. You also have a pulse ability which acts as a shield and can provide clues for solving puzzles. You can also parry with it, by the way. It'll take you about 8 hours to complete the story, which I'm perfectly okay with. In an era where games run 80+ hours with endless character customization, it's actually a breath of fresh air to have a game be so straightforward. Don't you just get overwhelmed with games that give you a crap ton of stuff to do? I mean, it starts to look a lot like homework at some point. The thing that caught my eye immediately about Cana was the art style and presentation. I say this about every game that looks good, but it really does look like a Pixar movie. The animation work is simply mesmerizing. It's the little subtle touches that goes unnoticed, like tapping your staff on the ground to collect an item, or the way you hover ever so swiftly above the ground when you purify the force of corruption. It might not have the big production budget of a Call of Duty game, but it sure can hold its own on a artistic scale. Cute little rot characters also help you throughout your journey. They're small spirit companions you collect throughout the game that help with completing puzzles and defeating enemies. Coming from an indie developer, I'm actually quite impressed with what Ember Lab was able to do. This is a hell of a lot better than some of the other big budget AAA games out there. My one and only complaint has to be some of the puzzles you have to figure out. They just don't give you enough information on what you need to do. There's one where you had to light a set of torches in a specific order. Like, how the hell was I supposed to know that? Number 4. Wolong, Fallen Dynasty. An awesome game, but unfortunately, a very demanding one. If you can put up with the difficulty, then Wolong offers some of the most rewarding gameplay you'll ever experience. It's a Souls-like game, so if you're not a fan, then I would steer clear. It's not exactly the spiritual successor to Ninja Gaiden as I was hoping for, but rather a cross between Nioh and Sekiro. Gameplay centers around a precise parry system that requires dedication and practice. Mastery of this mechanic is crucial for survival in this game. Supposedly, it's been made easier to perform compared to the demo that was released a few months back. I'll admit, there is somewhat of a steep learning curve, especially for those unfamiliar with this style of gameplay. But once mastered, provides some of the most rewarding and addictive combat ever in a video game. The enemies you fight all look great. Beautifully designed, imbued with nice visual touches. The haunting detail like torn off flesh really bring the creatures to life. Boss fights are big, epic, and completely different from the one before it, making it a pleasure to reach the end of a level. Environments don't exactly share the same quality of detail, but the lighting effects do make up for it. Overall, it's a very good looking game. And if you're playing on PS5, you get two graphic settings to choose from: resolution and frame rate. Resolution targets 4K, and frame rate gives you a consistent 60 FPS. Both options which are only available on PlayStation 5, so all you PS4 owners can suck it. Just kidding. The game is tough, no doubt about it. You're either gonna love it or hate it, and I think by now you should know where you stand regarding these type of games. If you're tired of the same old cookie-cutter gameplay of recent action games and not scared of a challenge, then I highly recommend Wolong Fallen Dynasty. By the way, I made a full video review on the game, which no one here watched, so please do check that out. Number 3. Crisis Core FF7 Reunion. I missed the original when it was released on PSP. Well, actually, to be more precise, I pre-ordered it from GameStop and never actually played it. So when I heard there was a remaster, I figured this was my second chance to finally experience this game on a modern game console. My first initial thought was, this looks a lot like Final Fantasy VII Remake we just got. The environment might not be as detailed, and there seems to be less particle effects, but the character models are pretty damn close. Of course, this was originally a PSP game, so the fact that it looks this good is still impressive. Magic spells and limit breaks look awesome. My only complaint is that some of the moves are full motion video. Like, a summon will start out as a video, but end with the attack using in-game graphics. Personally, I think it looks a little jarring when combining the two elements. Couldn't they have just redone the entire summon intro using the in-game graphics? The audio has also been redone. There's a new arranged soundtrack from the original composer and fully voiced dialogue in both English and Japanese. I'm also told the battle system has been improved. Well, I never actually played the original, so I can't say how improved it is, but I will say this, it is smooth. In fact, I might even like it more than the battle system in the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I just love how easily accessible all the magic spells and items are. Like, I don't have to break away from the combat to figure out where an item is. Command shortcuts and item selection just feels easy and intuitive. I also love the digital mind wave system. Now, I know this feature was in the original, and I know it's still pretty divisive, but I really like it. I think it gives the gameplay an element of surprise. Because it's a JRPG, battles can get a little repetitive after a while, but the digital mind wave system keeps it refreshing. If you've never heard of it, it's sort of like a roulette in the top left of the screen. If 3 of the same images match up, then you get whatever skill the image pertains to. For example, you might get unlimited use of magic spells for a brief period of time. I think because of this, it takes a lot of the menu selection out and allows you to focus more on the gameplay. Of course, the one drawback is that you pretty much have to rely on luck to perform certain attacks. For example, limit breaks and summon spells can only be executed once the corresponding images appear. It's a bummer, but like I said, it keeps the combat fun and exciting. The story is also quite interesting. Playing it actually made me appreciate the Final Fantasy VII Remake a whole lot more. Knowing how certain things came to be just made me really think about these characters a lot more. It's also weird to see Sephiroth talking to other people. My whole life, I always pictured him as being this mystical being that no one could ever find. So to see him here having a normal conversation with another person is kind of surreal. If you can't wait for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Crisis Core Reunion should hold you over. Number 2. Dead Space. This game is freaking awesome. If you played the original and want to experience this horror masterpiece all over again, then here's your chance. This is more than just a simple remake, as the game has been given a complete overhaul. Rebuilt from the ground up for next gen, Dead Space brings along numerous visual improvements. New geometry, shaders, and higher resolution textures have been added, giving the game more depth and detail. Existing visuals look even better as well. Particles, fog, and pyrotechnics now interact more realistically with the environment. The USG Shuji Ishimura has never looked better. It is hauntingly beautiful. You want a game to show off next gen? Then this is it. Sorry PS4 owners, you're out of luck. The sound design has also been reworked. You can now hear Isaac's heartbeat corresponding with what's happening around him. This is definitely not a game for the faint of heart. If you've got severe anxiety issues, this might not be the game for you. Gameplay will be familiar to those who played the original, but with a few improvements. There's a new peeling system introduced. Not only can you sever limbs like before, but there are certain weapons that will allow you to essentially tear away flesh from monsters. The pulse rifle, for example, which has now become one of my favorite weapons, can now rip enemies apart. You can literally see the flesh falling off the bones. It's a gruesome effect, but one you can't help but applaud its artistry. There's also been improvements made to the 0G sections of the game, which are now less frustrating with smoother controls. Circuit breakers have been added to some levels, helping to take advantage of the air tank upgrades on Isaac's rig suit. Another thing I noticed was that some additions have been made to previous levels. There might be an extra room, or maybe another hallway, or even an additional scene that wasn't in the original. Although the game felt familiar to me at first, the developers really did go out of their way to make this game feel fresh and new. The look and feel of the game changed so much, I honestly felt like I was playing it for the very first time again. Dead Space will definitely go down in history as one of the best remakes ever. Here's hoping we get Dead Space 2 and 3 down the line. Number 1. Resident Evil 4. It's been a long time coming. I've been itching to play this game ever since its announcement, and I purposely waited till after the embargo to give my final thoughts. Anyway, now that everyone has gotten their hands on the game, I can finally tell you the truth. Does RE4 live up to the hype, and is it deserving of all the high scores from other reviewers? Well, I had to think long and hard about this one. And although there were moments during the game where I had my doubts, I can honestly say that after it was all said and done, it did surpass my expectations. Capcom really did go all out with this one. I like to think of it as a culmination of all the things they've learned so far since the series reboot with Resident Evil 7. Building off of what they accomplished with the RE2 remake, Resident Evil 4 has a darker, sinister feel to it. Yet staying true to the original, there are still action-heavy sequences. A lot of people blame RE5 as the reason why RE6 lost its survival horror feel, but I would go so far as to say that the original RE4 was the gateway into all that. As I'm playing the game, I noticed moments that felt so far removed from what I've come to know as Resident Evil, and yet through it all, still manages to retain its horror aspect. One moment you're in a shootout with multiple enemies in a room, and the next you're alone in a dark, winding corridor. It's this juggling act of action and horror that Resident Evil 4 does so well, and the reason why I think future RE games fail to achieve the same kind of success. They just never really knew how to balance out the two. Maneuvering your character also feels a lot easier. In the original, there was a constant stop and go kind of action. I remember you could only run straight, and at best you might be able to steer slightly left or right. But if you wanted to make a hard turn, you pretty much had to come to a complete stop. Movement here feels so much more natural and intuitive. It's almost as if the game knows where you need to go. Speaking of intuitive, the addition of the knife parry is an absolute game changer. It's an excellent alternative when you want to conserve ammo, or if you're in a tight situation and don't have enough time to line up a headshot. You can pretty much parry almost anything that comes your way. Heck, you can even parry a chainsaw. Stealth kills are now possible, and the suplex makes a return. It is freaking hilarious, but in a good way. Reminds me of like WWE. Environments are more detailed, giving off the impression that you really are far away from home. I never realized how spooky tree branches could look in a video game. You want to know what's unnerving? Walking alone in the woods and suddenly hearing the motor on a chainsaw running. I was like in full panic mode when I heard that. Full body dismemberment have been added, and it makes the gunplay so much more satisfying. My only complaint is probably one I had with the original, so it's not really a fault of the remake. I really did not care for the catapult section of this game. You know, the first section where you're at the castle? Ugh, I just hate it. Luckily, Ashley's AI has been tweaked for the better, so escorting her to the next location isn't as annoying as it used to be. By the way, what's up with Ada's voice? She sounded so sexy in RE2, but here she sounds like she's holding her nose as she's reading her lines. Like, what the hell happened?
Oh, Leon. You know I don't work in town.
Regardless, whether you've played this game before, I think everyone will find something to like. Newcomers will love the intense action, and veterans will appreciate the subtle gameplay changes. Is it a masterpiece? That's debatable. Is it better than the original? Definitely. Is it worth buying a next-gen system for? Absolutely. If you've been on the fence about buying a PS5, then these games are more than enough reason to pick one up. Shortages are over, so you shouldn't have any difficulty finding one at retail price. Of course, most of these games are also available on PS4, so if you don't mind playing at 30 FPS with less graphical detail, then more power to you. But I mean, who the hell wants to do that? And if you've already made the move to next gen, I have countless other videos you can check out. Later.